Hello and welcome to this episode of Sum Up Sunday, where I take a look at the best and worst of gaming news this past week. The game in the background is, of course, The Binding of Isaac. For more Isaac-related content, tune in every Monday and Friday. In the news this week, Nvidia have announced and released version 326.01 of GeForce. This is the first of their WHQL certified GeForce drivers to work with Windows 8, having been released on the 28th with Windows version 8.1. In a statement, Nvidia have said that Nvidia has long committed to working with Microsoft to ensure the best possible Windows experience for GeForce users. Our close working relationship with Microsoft allows us to provide WHQL certified GeForce drivers via Windows updates on day one for key milestones such as releases and previews. However, the driver is not showing up yet for some users and GPUs. We are currently working closely with Microsoft to correct this and will make the driver available by the end of the day. This was said on the 28th, and I have heard no evidence that this statement was incorrect. You loved The Penetrator, or at least 4 million plus people did when they purchased Saints Row 3. Successor Saints Row 4 has, however, been banned in Australia for an alien anal probe. Well, not banned per se, so much as refused classification. Australia has recently introduced an R18 plus category for games. Up until now, it's only gone up to 15 plus, leading to many games being banned. But now they included an 18 plus, and many people thought this would be the end of the strangling of the games industry within Australia. But no, it is not to be. Saints Row 4's alien anal probe scenes and weapons have been banned because they're not justified by context, as it says in the official report. However, many people disagree. They believe that the artwork and the context of the game itself is sufficient. Despite this, the Australian Classification Board, under the auspices of Donald McDonald, which I think is a fantastic name, shame about the game, have released a media statement which reads, "The acting director of the Classification Board, Mr. Donald McDonald, announced today that Saints Row 4 was the first computer game in Australia to be refused classification under the guidelines for the classification of computer games that commenced on the 1st of January 2013. The Classification Board classified game RC, refused classification, in accordance with Item 1A of the National Classification Code and in accordance with computer game guidelines. In the board's opinion, Saints Row 4 includes interactive visual depictions of implied sexual violence, which are not justified by context. In addition, the game includes elements of illicit or prescribed drug use related to incentives or rewards. Such depictions are prohibited by computer game guidelines." Mr. McDonald said the Classification Board has now been applying the new computer game guidelines for almost 6 months, and this was the first game to be refused classification. Apart from today's decision, since the beginning of the year, the board has classified 17 games R18+ under the new guidelines, Mr. McDonald said. When making the decision about computer games, the Classification Board must use the criteria set out in the Classification, Publications, Film and Computer Games Act 1995, the National Classification Code, and the Guidelines for Classification of Computer Games. The new guidelines for classification of computer games came into effect on the 1st of January 2013. Prior to then, Australia did not have an adult category for computer games. An application to classify Saints Row 4 was received by the Classification Board on the 13th of May 2013. Classification decisions can be viewed at the classification website www.classification.gov.au. Now, as the saying goes, this really gets my goat, or it being Australia, this really frustrates my kangaroo. I really want a kangaroo now. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. This really frustrates me because it's pushing on the boundaries of what adult content is allowed to be. There's this idea in certain governments and even whole countries that video games are a thing for children, and that the idea of an adult video game is just not possible. It's contradictory terms to these people. And that's no longer the case. It may have been at one point, but no longer. Australia here has shown a very, very closed-minded attitude towards games with illicit content, such as drug use and or implied sexual, not sexual, implied sexual content. In Saints Row 4, actual scenes using this weapon are censored completely, pixelated. It's non-pornographic at all. And yet apparently that is still too much. Complaining about linking drugs to rewards, I could understand that, yes. However, not the alien anal probe complaint. which is a really, really weird thing to have to say, and I'm just disappointed in you, Australia. Going from the asinine to the old, this month a remake of Realms of Arcania Blade of Destiny has been released. The original, of course, being released in between 1992 and 1993, depending where you live. If you lived in Germany, you got it almost a year sooner. Released originally on the Amiga and on MS-DOS. The Realms of Arcania series, also known as the Northlands Trilogy, includes Realms of Arcania Blade of Destiny, Star Trail, and Shadow over River. The other games in the series are also Drakensong, The River of Time, Chains of Satanav, and Demonomicon, which is really, really difficult to say. I kept saying in Demonomicon, which is obviously wrong. The Dark Eye was the original pen and paper RPG, which was written by Hans Joachim Alpers, Bernhard Hennen, and Ulrich Kiersau. The remake is a full one-to-one and using new 3D engines, with the original games of course being made in pseudo 3D engines, and featuring what at the time was a pretty good feature that you could save your game after beating it and then import into any of the sequels, despite the fact that when the original game was made, they weren't sure there would be sequels. The original game was of course developed by Guido Henkel, who was the designer programmer, Hans-Jürgen Brandl, who was another designer programmer, Jochen Hammer, who was designer, Rukan Jokri, who was the cover artist, Vadim Petrzyński, I've slaughtered that name, Petrzyński or something similar, an artist, and Markus Heinrich, who's a relatively tame name by comparison, who was the final artist. The original game was developed by Attic Entertainment Software and published by Schmidt Spiel and Freundlich GmbH in Germany, Surtec in the United States, US Gold in Australia, EU, Japan, Korea, Singapore and Taiwan. It was designed by Fantasy Productions, with Rudolf Stember and Chris Hulsbeck being composers. It's not remembered by history as one of the best RPGs ever made, however, it is remembered as one of the first to have brothels, which is probably indicative of its German origins, where such things are much less taboo than in the current Western world, and some people were originally worried the remake would contain higher graphics but the same content. UIG Entertainment and Attic Entertainment have released a gameplay trailer for Realms of Arcania Blades of Destiny, which was released on the end of June on PC with a recommended retail price of £14.99 or €19.99. It was developed by Crafty Games and is a one-to-one remake of the 1992-93 original. It features between 20 and 80 hours of game time, depending on playing style, and for the first time is in full 3D.